In my experiences working with different kinds of people who support Filipinos, like try to make it a genuine experience for yourself.
Yeah.
Try to make it a genuine experience for others. Be really open about who you are, what you've been through. It makes it real for you and for them. The other thing I would say is also just being consistent. Being consistent, showing up for community. I think that's very critical when you work in equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Ben is a Canadian Filipino who I got to talk with in depth about his involvement with the Filipino and LGBTQ2S community. Originally from Manila, Philippines, he moved to Mississauga at a young age and later attended the University of Toronto. There, he found his passion for bringing exposure to the issues facing new immigrants to Canada, in particular Filipino youth and the queer community. This led to a career as a settlement worker and today as an urban planner focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. He met me at the University of Toronto campus, where he has returned to work on his PhD. Kindly, he gave me a tour of his academic stomping grounds and shared with me his personal journey as a Filipino-Canadian who has dedicated his life to seeing his community thrive in an ever-changing world.
Thank you very much for showing me the University of Toronto. Like, I looked it up and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a Mac Daddy institution. You're currently getting your PhD from here.
Yes, just generally speaking, post-secondary institutions are amazing gateways for opportunity for people.
Yeah.
Like the networks that you make, the people that you meet, your proximity to resources is almost infinite, especially if you're at an institution like the University of Toronto. I'm doing a PhD in social justice education, more specifically collaboration in workplace learning and social change. My research is centered on Filipino inclusion within urban development processes. So it's really just a reflection of what I've done in equity work. Equity's always been a big part of my life. I would honestly say that it took me my whole career to get to this point. I work full-time, I teach.
And you've been highly involved in the community. You were born in the Philippines, came here, but also in college you were the president of the Philippine Association.
It was the Filipino Students Association of Toronto, FSAT.
How is that tied then to what it is that you're doing today?
So when I was at UofT, I think what made it extra special was that specific moment in time that we were in. The Filipino Center Toronto, which is now based in Scarborough, it was actually located right at St. Jamestown, which is still downtown. So there was a lot of engagement between us and the Filipino Center Toronto. But because of that close proximity, we had a lot of events. Everything that we ever needed was on campus. Like, I don't think I would have had the same experiences had I not been in an institution like UofT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that's driving what you're wanting to study and put forth today from an academic perspective and professional perspective?
It all goes back to exposure. I was exposed to a lot of things that were happening within the Filipino community. At that time, the Living Caregiver program was gaining a lot of attention. For those who don't know, like the Living Caregiver program at that time was a federal program that facilitated people coming from different countries, mostly from the Philippines, coming to Canada and working as domestic workers. So during that period, I learned a lot about the plight of the Filipino people as a result of the Living Caregiver program. I learned about different grassroots formations and different advocacy pieces that were happening. There's a lot of amazing work happening in supporting caregivers. The Philippine Overseas Labor Office, the Philippine Consulate General of Toronto, like a really great relationships with the Filipino community here and in partnering with the social development sector. So we have a very elaborate network of nonprofit organizations that work together to support Filipinos. One of the first projects that we did when we were at the Filipino Students Association was an event called Filipino Awareness Week. A lot of it was just about giving visibility to Filipino issues, having conversations about Filipino youth identity. I think that combined with the frontline community work that we were doing at the Filipino Center, combined with like all of the different advocacy pieces that we were doing through Filipino Awareness Week. All of that led to a big event that we had in my fourth year of university called State of the Filipino Union. It was really just understanding like the current conditions and strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, like emerging opportunities that existed for the Filipino community. And that was all youth-led. We put that together. We had
Was it the first of its kind? When you
yeah,
guys...
here, exactly. So we had politicians, community advocates, combination of like student groups and grassroots formation groups and faith-based communities just to have a dialogue. So all of that cemented what I knew I wanted to do with my life. And this is me at like 19 years old.
Yeah.
My about me, if anyone wanted to know anything about me, it was Filipino community work. Not only has it enriched me and my understandings and my levels of analysis when it comes to the community work and working with Filipinos and working in student development, but I've made friends who have been my friends forever here. I myself, in my current capacity, I'm not like a frontline, on the ground person the way I used to be. When I talk about people who are like really, really on the ground and like doing incredible things for the Filipino communities every day. And I don't know if you have the same thing in the US, but we have like settlement workers. Yeah, I don't know if it's in the US.
Yeah, what is that?
So settlement workers are like community workers.
Yeah.
That work specifically with newcomers and immigrants.
Ah, okay.
They're definitely at the forefront of understanding the challenges, the barriers, figuring out what the opportunities are for new migrants and what they experience.
Especially because the laws and everything is changing so quickly.
A settlement worker will be a newcomer's access point for information and referral support.
Wow.
I've been a settlement worker for like, 10 years?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of settlement workers who are currently doing that amazing work. I can't talk about impact and community without mentioning them. I would also say that nothing has been more powerful in bringing people together than things like the grassroots formations of like faith-based communities, basketball, all these food festivals. Like, these are really bringing community together in spaces that you wouldn't even believe could even do it. These things stay with you, and it informs my approach and it informs my practice. And I have always treated that as like a level of expertise and a level of analysis that I bring when I'm on a project and I'm advising clients or ministries or corporations or foundations. I could firmly say I understand community development. I understand youth capacity building.
You're very involved or have been very involved in the LGBTQIA, is that?
2S LGBTQ plus.
Okay.
I guess in the Canada context, it's always changing. Queer is also being taken up by like younger generations as an umbrella term to refer to all like queer, trans, two-spirit people, but we say 2S LGBTQ plus for now.
In particular to the Filipino community, what is it that they're dealing with? What is it that they're facing, not only as a Filipino, but also in this other community, the queer community?
So Canada is a signatory in the United Nations Convention on Refugees. As a result, we do have a lot of refugees from all around the world that come to Canada who have experienced persecution on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And that is a grounds in which Canada recognizes for us to accept refugees and for them to be protected persons. So I've spent a lot of time working with queer and trans newcomers from all around the world, but rarely from the Philippines. But I've met a lot of Filipinos who've come here through other channels, like through family reunification, like when they're brought here by their families or family sponsorship. And there's a lot of queer Filipinos in Toronto. These formations happen like in really surprising ways. Just to give you an example, there was a very well-known Filipino youth basketball program, predominantly like male identified, but what was sort of birthed from that was a very large queer Filipino newcomer youth group.
Playing basketball?
No, they just hung out in the court.
Oh, okay.
I know. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was like a very well-known organized group, but there have been like different efforts made by local grassroots groups to do events focused on like Filipino queerness, but a lot of them are like informal gatherings. Every year there seems to be like a new group trying to bring people and build community. I would say that in terms of like the more mainstream, the larger Filipino institutions could definitely be doing more for the queer Filipino diaspora. The diaspora now, you see the impacts that it's had on the built environment and on the spaces that we have now. But I think if anything, the queer community in Toronto, it's really just a matter of the preservation of space. I feel like all of those different like structural forces of urban planning are potentially erasing like a lot of queer ethnic spaces.
Yeah.
Which really worries me.
Yes.
So in terms of like the future and the current state of queer Filipinos, I'm just really worried about where are we gonna go and what spaces will be offered to us. The way that our systems are designed and developed, especially within the context of the downtown core, it's to build and to meet population density targets and to meet intensification targets and to meet economic development target and condominium development. The gay village down that way, it is undergoing a period of like really extreme gentrification. The second floor of Cruise and Tangos is known as like a place where a lot of queer ethnic people hang out.
Yeah.
So a small house that is known for hosting like millions of gay people. In the eyes of the development world, it's just a tiny house that has the potential to be a condo. And that's the justification for erasing these spaces. So that's the current state that we're in now.
Is the end goal to bring awareness, to create change, to create systemic change? Is that where you're headed?
I knew there was a limit in terms of how much I could support people. Like when I worked with them individually, like as a social service worker. So now, like I work at a higher level in policy, so I'm not on the ground, but I work with people who are. I often advise companies on their equity strategies. I often advise on how to make things more accessible and inclusive based on people from different equity deserving groups. And I cannot stress that enough to any community worker or to anyone who's even considering getting into community work. But do things that are reflective and responsive to community needs, where you recognize that communities know best what they need.
Yeah.
I've always leveraged space in every position that I've ever had. And it's like, I had to be like a full-time advocate.
Yes.
To get these programs. And a lot of it comes out of my own personal will. No one was necessarily telling me to do these things.
Yeah.
But I did. We all know how much community changes and how much policies change and how immigration policy has like a tremendous bearing on the lives and lived experiences of Filipino migrants. And like, I would only hope I could demonstrate how interesting someone's approach can be when they are open enough and willing to be a community worker. Bridging the community with other aspects of yourself, I really believe is the future of what this world should be, like when we look at the future of the Filipino community.